are thrilled to have you. This talk with our curator, Sara Felice, sums up our fall program series where we celebrate Florida artists Bruce Marsh, Dolores Coe, and Barton Gilmore with 3 amazing exhibitions. We are very excited to have Bruce here because he really was instrumental in helping to set up the St. Petersburg Junior College's art department way back in the mid-60s. And he also recruited some of our professors that made such an impact on generations of students. And included is Jim Higginbuckle, who is joining us in the audience this evening. Jim. So we are just thrilled to celebrate him as he moved on to USF and has influenced many generations of artists in his own right, and we're thrilled to have him. So I want to introduce Sara Felice, our curator, who has just done an amazing exhibition that is a retrospective of Bruce's career right here in the Interactive Gallery. So without further ado, please help me welcome Bruce Marsh and Sara Felice.
Hi everyone, we're so thankful to see you all here tonight, especially after everything we've all been through in the last couple of months. This exhibition is ironically very timely, and we'll kind of discuss that a little bit as we move through the conversation. I know many of you have attended our previous artist talks this semester, but if you have not, this is how things are going to go. So I'm going to introduce Bruce. We're going to chat back and forth informally a little bit. I'm going to test my flexibility skills since I hurt my knee this week, because we have one microphone. So we're going to do a little microphone hot potato. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and then we'll leave a portion at the end for the audience to go ahead and ask theirs. And I know many of you are friends, colleagues, and family, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions to ask yourselves. Bruce was born in California and was educated at the University of California, Santa Barbara, UCLA, and California State College at Long Beach. Over the entirety of his professional career, he has devoted his energies equally to both teaching and painting. In 1969, he joined the faculty at the University of South Florida and taught there until retiring as Professor Emeritus in 2003. He has exhibited his paintings extensively in Florida and the Southeast and has had exhibitions in Los Angeles and New York. He has had, well, I suppose this is now 6 museum shows over the past 4 years? How many museum shows have you had over the past 4 years? Because it says 5, but I'm assuming this is now 6?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Okay. We're gonna assume it's 6. A solo exhibition at the Vero Beach Museum of Art, group shows at the Baker Museum in Naples, Tampa Museum of Art, and the Maitland Museum of Art and Art History, and now the Leepa Rattner Museum of Art. During the past 25 years, a major part of his efforts have been devoted to large-scale paintings for public spaces. He's very involved in working directly from the figure and has hosted a weekly figure drawing group at the Firehouse Cultural Center in Ruskin since 2015. His work has been primarily based on landscapes and is centered on his interests in perception and intense observation, always hoping for magic. Over the past few years, he's been working on a series of complex paintings of groups in very ordinary situations and places, primarily from his Florida suburban surroundings. Everybody please welcome Bruce Marsh. So Bruce and I had an opportunity to sit down, which feels like years ago at this point, in your kitchen, dining room, and discuss this exhibition and its development. Some of those questions are going to be asked tonight. So we're going to start off with the name. Terra Incognita, which is a concept with deep historical resonance, signifying both physical and conceptual exploration. How has this idea of navigating the unknown informed your artistic practice, And in what ways do you see this theme manifesting in your visual language?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm very appreciative. And it somehow seems sort of maybe poetic to at this sort of the end of my career to be at a St. Petersburg Junior College facility where I began teaching a long time ago. To the question of the relation to the title Terra Incognita, and in terms of the question about exploring things and looking for new possibilities and new ways. All my career, I've been looking for new and fresh ideas. And there's some things that run throughout the work from beginning to end. And it's also a really great pleasure to have a show where there's work from the earliest parts of my career here in Florida, like the grid pieces, up into the leaf piece around the corner that was finished 3 weeks ago. So it's a real pleasure to have them together and see them and to think about it. But I've constantly been looking for fresh ideas and ways to approach what is my real love of sharp focus painting, of painting the figure and painting the landscape. And the first came along at the junior college. I was doing some silk screens, and I was silk screen prints, and I was doing them. It's sort of like I set a program for myself in terms of learning some things about color, about composition, about perception that had not been in my education. And I was doing a print. I was in the midst of a print, and I had 4 little squares in the middle of the image with clouds in them floating against another background. And it suddenly struck me that that was, for me, a spectacular idea. I never finished that print. I went and stretched a canvas and began a series of these grid paintings in which I would put multiple imagery together with the grid. And so literally looking for an idea where in figure ground there's no ground. There's 2 figures that compete with each other for you to see. So anyway, and all the way through, I did a series on Ang. I've done this series just now, recently, about groups and suburban surroundings, and constantly kind of looking for and feeling new ideas or new approaches. And it's really been marked also by my involvement with painting the figure on a weekly basis in watercolor. And so literally, since I think 2015, every Thursday night, we have the figure night, and I'm in there for 3 hours to paint from the figure, but really pushing myself to use unexpected palettes, unexpected approaches to find new ways to bring life to it. And the earlier ones, I think, were much better. But anyway, I'll keep at it.
I'm going to go off the script here, actually. I do this every time. I have a list of questions, and then I say, immediately after the first question, I say I'm going off the script. So, that being said, one of the newer works that I love personally as a curator most is the ball piece. At least for me, a lot of the works that are incorporating more of the suburban surrounding in the figure have this nostalgia element to them. Something I noticed right off the bat when I saw that one as I entered your studio, I was like, whoa, I gravitated towards that. You actually removed a lot of the signs. So, and now text in art obviously draws your eye immediately. It's very powerful, and you have to use it with intent, otherwise it steals the show, sorry. And can you talk a little bit about how it's almost like, this microphone, apologies. It's almost as if every scene you have with the figure is devoid of indication of location, especially the Tampa Park, which if we didn't know that was downtown Tampa, of course, it could be anywhere in America. Is that intentional? And can you describe your thought process around it?
Well, in that whole series, I've looked for situations with a group of people, but a very ordinary situation, And the idea of almost like a documentary approach to recording suburban activities. This thing about meeting together out on the lawn or walking through the mall. And in those, I've, as with almost all of them, been real concerned with suppressing details. So there's certain details I really focus on, and then there's parts that I don't. And an example is the mall painting. In an image of the mall, and I work from photographs constantly. All of these are from photographs. But in the mall painting, there's no signs at all. But I think you never notice that, you know. And I felt no need to draft and deal with all those signs on all those shops, where the main thing was the figure and the child coming through this empty space and being reflected. And so that's one way I've found of transforming what I'm looking at, of being very selective about where the emphasis lies. Does that answer it?
Yes.
So I'm going to rewind just a little bit, and we're going to go back to California, because we actually talked about this a little bit when we sat down in your house. So your artistic trajectory spans over 5 decades, encompassing significant shifts in regional influence and stylistic approaches. How has your relocation from California, the California art scene, to Florida shaped your engagement with place, and how have you navigated the transition between these distinct visual and cultural landscapes? And I think if you all can view the floor, the piece over there with the floor, trees, breast, that's from California, correct?
Yep.
That's from that period. Yeah. So just to give you a visual cue of the difference between your surroundings.
Well, I think a very main thing that comes to mind is the huge difference in the environment here in Florida as opposed to Southern California. Southern California is essentially a desert, okay? And so the idea of coming here with the lush growth and the trees, and then those exploding giant skies full of clouds, just had an immense influence on me. And I've done a huge number of works with the water, rivers, the bay, the Gulf, and also I've done a lot of sky things, of dealing with clouds and combinations of the clouds. So that's been very important. In terms of the culture and the whole idea of the art community, in California, it was very dominated at that point by a group of figurative painters. And you know the work of Richard Diebenkorn, or certainly the work of here's her names escape me, but all the other painters out there. And so it's very loose and intuitive painting of figures in nameless kind of surroundings. But here, there was this immense and almost immediate shift. The first couple of years I was here, working with the landscape, dealing with that sunlight, dealing with the lush growth. And I mentioned earlier the silkscreen prints. I did, probably 20 silkscreen prints. And it was almost like designing a course for myself in color and in perception, things that had been neglected in my education. And so anyway, and then once that idea came to me about the grid painting, that remained for many years, and it has remained, the idea of working with multiplicity of images. The idea of some of them are sort of pseudo collage, as if, you know, this is pasted against this or on this. But the idea of the freedom and the possibilities there of providing combinations of images has been a continual thing through all the work.
So reflecting on the grid paintings.
With any question, I could go for the whole evening.
I know. Well, I'm grabbing at the little nuggets of information. I'm like, wait, that one's really good. So I fast forwarded actually all the way to the end of my program, but this is not the end by any means. So reflecting on all of your work, it intersects, with
Key art. I'm just gonna yell.
With key art historical movements and cultural transformations. how do you envision your contribution to the evolving canon of contemporary painting? What role do you believe your work will play in future art historical analysis, particularly in relation to the discourse on regionalism and the American landscape tradition? I know that's a lot to think about. It's a lot.
Work my way through it a little bit.
Yeah. I can repeat it. So.
Well, let me say that in teaching, I tried to stay very aware of what's happening in the whole art world. And frankly, I'm extremely interested in a great deal of what's happened, which is a great deal that's happened is way beyond painting in terms of installments of different sorts, in terms of environments, in terms of events. And I've been very interested in those people that are doing that, and it's been important to include that and those considerations in my teaching. But at the same time, when I'm in the studio, there's no question of what I'm going to make. It's going to be a painting, and it's going to be a painting that's sharp focus, and it's going to be a painting that's consistent from one side to the other. Every square inch gets the same amount of attention. So there's kind of a dichotomy there, of being really interested in the avant-garde that's going on constantly in terms of things that are happening. And then in the studio, my impulses and my interest. And part of it is the idea of building environments or doing multiple sculpture kind of things, or doing events out in the community, doing performance sorts of things. Seem to me extremely temporary, and you can't maintain that. I mean the expense and the time, etc. It's never even been faintly a temptation, with one exception. And that exception was during the late 80s. I established a computer lab at USF in the art department and taught some beginning computer imaging courses, electronic imaging, we called it. And along with 3 other people, we did an event that we spent a semester working on. And it was myself and Roger Palmer and a graduate student. And we had 4 musicians, we had 4 dancers, and we had 4 projectors, and we had a composer. And we put together a piece called Smarter Than Dogs that was a very open-ended exploration of changing images, of interactive images. There were places where the dancer could just take a step to a certain place, and the whole story would change, would jump to another part of it. But those ended up being showed to, I think, 3 visiting 3rd grade classes. But anyway, and also the whole involvement. It was 10 years of being involved with computers. And I never hit on an idea that really deserved the use of the computer or needed it. It was really strange, and it was really refreshing to turn back to painting, and where I was hugely interested and hugely motivated.
All right, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you a choice for the next question. Do you want to talk about teaching, or do you want to talk about your visual aesthetic? You pick one. Sure. Wow. Okay. All right. So your paintings often straddle the line between representational and abstract, creating a dynamic tension that invites varied interpretations. How do you conceptualize this interplay between the literal and the abstract, and what theoretical frameworks inform your approach to this duality?
Well, one thing pops into my mind immediately, and that is that if you select 4 square inches of any one of my paintings, it doesn't make much sense, okay? It's blobs of color and pieces of color put together. That's if you look at it from a foot away. If you back up to 20 feet away, it snaps together as a very obvious and very immediate image. So that idea of that close look, I'm almost working as if I'm making an abstract painting, but I have really severe severe restraints about the color, the shapes, etc. But it's almost like, and I've thought about this, I could start painting an expanse of grass or an expanse of water, expanse of clouds, and I don't need to paint many of those until I've learned the system. And I can put away the photograph, and then I can do acres of those clouds, or acres of that water, knowing the kind of rules of that situation. And I do think that working in a pseudo collage way, putting multiple images together, as you first look at them, you don't recognize, as I'm looking at these from a distance, you don't recognize so much what they are, but it's like an abstract play of strange fractured images, of fractured squares and circles. And so that abstract, and rather than abstract, I think about it, the presence of the paint mark or the organization of shapes is something that happens very intuitively. And I don't know how I can look at from a few feet away and make something that works really well from 20 feet away. But anyway.
So your paintings often seem to engage with the passage of time. I think, so I created this question weeks ago, and I've thought more about it now, and I think there's more to it than what I wrote. Because, so yes, your paintings engage with the passage of time, but if everyone can look for a moment over at the pier piece. We hung this show in late August. That place no longer exists today. So you have meticulous detail, but you're also capturing what we are observing in real time as fleeting moments. How do you think about time when you approach new work, and what strategies do you use to convey a sense of duration or stillness within your compositions? And also, just from thinking about it more, you're really marking a point in time in the history of Florida. Do you feel as an artist, that you have a duty to do so, because the state of our world, we're realizing, I think, kind of a sobering reality the last few months is that our environments are quite ephemeral. So,
well, I frankly, I don't think about time, and it's not something that as a subject comes into my consideration when I'm thinking about making a piece. But I can look around the room here and see all sorts of references to time. And one is, there's a picture of an ancient Greek theater. And it's a picture from a trip we all took to Europe, and it's me standing back there, and it's our son, an 18-month-old toddler. And so thinking about time, there's a time thing there. We're standing in this ancient place, and I'm standing there slightly separated away from my child, my very young child. But that idea of a huge expanse of time being involved in that. There's a large expanse of time in the act of painting these things. None of these happen in less than at least 3 weeks. Okay, it's 3 or 4 weeks. And so there's that passage of time as I'm making them. Most of them are from photographs, as I say, and that's generally an instant. The water is still in that photograph. The people aren't moving over on that lawn. But I don't consciously think about ways to talk about movement. I don't shift focus, or I don't use blur. The closest I come is the combining of things. Like I think there's the one landscape with the bright clouds and dark ground on that side over there. And the idea of, there are 2 different times involved in that, about, although they happened at once, there was the time of those clouds being still very illuminated by the sun, but everything on the ground is very dark, barely visible.
So I know you're not thinking about time. But
The answer is no.
But your work is reflective of a point in time, whether or not you are thinking about it. You have a recent focus on group scenes in suburban environments, coincides actually with more broad sociocultural shifts, including the collective introspection brought on by COVID. How do you situate these works within the discourse of social realism, and in what ways do they reflect or resist contemporary cultural narrative? So a lot of the work of the group scenes actually came during the time of COVID, and at least for me, as a curator, I had a really hard time because my job is quite social, and I had a very hard time not interacting with others. Was that, were you reaching out in a way through your work for almost a longingness of that interaction?
Yeah, it was a very conscious decision about doing the groups, and the groups were devoid of any kind of political or social association, and it was to find groups that were quite neutral. I mean, people sitting around on grass are neither, good or bad here or there. The woman in the mall with the child. And so I find things that don't have common associations of, oh, this is good or this is bad or whatever, but sort of like trying to have a I think, somewhat objective point of view of very ordinary times and things in the community. I'm still mixed about them. I'm not sure, other than they were useful exercises in painting, but I'm not sure about their ultimate kind of significance.
Okay, so I want to go back to teaching a little bit. I know it's been some time since you've taught, but well, at least in the collegiate setting, but your dual roles as an educator and practitioner have undoubtedly influenced one another. How has your teaching philosophy, both at St. Pete and USF, intersected with your evolving artistic practice, and what insights have emerged from the dialogue between teaching and creating during your time there?
Well, I would say that the teaching was extremely important to me, and I really fed off it. That things would pop up in the course, working with a group of 20 or 30 kids, young people, and things that would happen would suggest one direction or another, and they often were really fed my ideas. I even put one of the, not this one, but there's an image up here, that one, of a project I gave to students. Take an old master's painting and realize it with paper stencils and 3 colors of spray paint, magenta, cyan, and yellow, okay? And that's really difficult. But anyway, is an illustration of the kind of things. I look for things in teaching that would challenge them, and things that would also interest them a great deal, that it wasn't some kind of dull routine. It was trying to make something which would surprise them and sometimes surprise me. And so anyway, it was hugely important to me. And let me also say that the job at USF was an absolute dream. I taught 2 days a week, 2 classes. And so my main energy and all went to my painting. And so I just felt hugely fortunate. And I really hope the legislature never heard about me being paid 2 days a week. And they didn't.
It's in the past. So I found it interesting when we were working on this show together is you've been working on the group scenes, but Yard Trees, which is just under the title vinyl as you enter the gallery, is the newest, correct?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing it for the first time and I went, wow, because I felt such a relationship between the mall and that, for what perhaps is a particularly odd reason, but it's almost this act of, so let's take
COVID for
and we're all quarantined. And I was up in New York, so I was quarantined a lot longer. And I found myself missing very simple things like, this is sad, going to the doctor's office and reading a magazine. Why? I don't know. But when I saw the paintings, I was like, oh yeah, the mall that I used to walk around in as a teenager, because that could be any place because of the logos, they're gone. You know, the clothing is not really specific of a time or a place. And suddenly I found the same sort of nostalgia in yard trees, because the view, at least the motion in the piece, feels as though you've spun like a little kid and then you fell in the grass and you look back up at what you saw, right? So I see the relationship without them literally being, the same topic at all. So is that intentional, A? And B, as you move forward in the group scenarios and or the landscape work, what's next for you? What are you focusing on?
It wasn't in the forefront of my thinking. I was looking for a very neutral situation for a group to be in, very common, very ordinary, and something that didn't have associations with it. So sitting around on a lawn or walking through a mall, is a very familiar thing. And you have to make up your own mind about what it might be about and what kind of repercussions it could have as you thought about it. But part of it, and before I say that, I'll say it's also not disconnected from the history of painting. The history of painting is primarily a history of groups of people, but they're watching someone commit suicide or something. And these are more neutral. But the idea that in our everyday experience, okay, and all the places we move to, and all the things we go through, okay, that I think there's just spectacular things happening visually that we ignore. And that idea of trying to celebrate the most ordinary thing and suggest that maybe every time you walk through the mall, it's an extraordinary experience or an amazing experience. And that's an idea that's hard to talk about, I think, without, but the idea about the quality of experience and the quality of your life and the quality of what you notice, okay? And I think it goes back a little bit to the detail in the paintings, etc. I think any square inch you could choose to look at and really study is quite remarkable and quite amazing. I could really imagine doing a painting of a square inch of this rug and being really challenging and being also significant for people to look at, because it raises other ideas in your head about looking at the ordinary things. So I also think in retrospect ideas will come up. Like the woman in the mall with the child, it's somehow about alienation. It's somehow about she has the child with her, but she's virtually alone. It's an inhuman environment. There's no signs of anything other than blank walls, and she's also reflected in the glass. Then her reflection in the glass, it brings up a whole issue about her identity, difference. But those are ideas that happen afterwards. In other words, after when I finish the painting, I'll sit back for a very short time. I finish the painting and it's away, it's gone. But the idea of the suggestions that happen. So.
Are you coming up with those the ideas are coming to you afterwards, or these are just suggestions that?
Yeah, just thought of it.
Okay, great. I think a lot of artists. Go ahead.
With Dolores, sentence by sentence, I would read them and say, "Does that make sense? Is that too corny?"